Hey everybody, welcome back to Experience Points, a less formal, more laid-back sort of video series where I talk about games that I've played a little bit of but have not yet finished. But today, I actually did finish Crystal Story, Dawn of Dusk from developer Bread Frown. This is a indie, kind of a really interesting little morsel of a game. Definitely one of those retro-inspired RPGs inspired by Earthbound, by Mother 3, and probably Zeldas and, a lot of like the classic 16-bit stuff, but also wears heavy inspirations from Toby Fox's Undertale as well. So we'll talk about a little bit more of that as we go, but definitely right off the bat, the first thing that caught my eye about this when I watched the trailer on Hitpoint a couple of days ago is that the visuals are absolutely gorgeous. It has really achieved that Game Boy Advance, Super Nintendo style look that he was going for. The game sounds really great, has very much a 8-bit style soundtrack, I think, listening in. But the game also has some instances where it uses some Mode 7 style graphics, or even regular Game Boy style graphics too sometimes. It is this really interesting mishmash of a bunch of different visual styles and audio styles that just make for a really unique experience. It's very experimental, feels kind of ethereal, feels kind of dreamlike. There's a lot going on here, and it feels like kind of a really interesting proof of concept, and I mean that in like the best possible way. The story of the game is also very much responsible for some of that dreamlike quality that I was just talking about. Basically, the game follows Mina, this character who has the ability to wield fire, which is useful for both solving puzzles and also combat, which takes two different forms. We'll talk about combat in a minute, but the dreamlike quality here is that this game is Dawn of Dusk, and basically there's two worlds that this game presents. Dusk side and Dawn side. You can probably get what that dichotomy is about. Two parallel worlds in which they have maybe parallel roles that they play within these parallel worlds. It's very interesting and kind of dreamlike, and the people that you interact with in one world will act pretty different from the way that they interact in the other. Just dreamlike quality. Definitely, I think a lot of that has also some of those Toby Fox inspirations, those Undertale inspirations I was talking about. Kind of informed some of those character design choices, but I like the way that they're going with this. And just like with most dreams, the details when it comes to a lot of the storytelling feel very fuzzy, feels sort of like there's not a super cohesive story from start to finish, in my opinion. By the end of the game, there's a lot of details that never really get fleshed out. There's some mysteries that never get solved, some identities that never get fully revealed. But this game is also kind of a follow-up sequel to the creator's first game, Crystal Story Awakening. So there's probably some context here that I'm not fully aware of, but it didn't prevent me from fully enjoying the experience this time around, though. It just led or added to more of that feeling of mystery, dreamlike quality. The difficulty of the game is kind of all over the place. The combat difficulty was mostly stemmed from just coming to grips with the controls of the game. It does use a controller, which is nice, but there's such a wide moveset that they couldn't all be mapped to the face buttons of the controller. Instead, one of the items that you might have to rely on, the spear or the javelin, is mapped to a trigger instead of a face button, which meant with pairing that with like running and jumping, fire and sword swinging. A small little nitpick is if somehow there was a way to map all of the attacks to the face buttons and then just leave the triggers to like item selection or something, that would have been nice. But again, just a small nitpick on that regard. The other source of difficulty that I bumped into is a lot of the puzzles feel a little bit vague, and at one point, at a couple points, I thought that maybe I was running into a bug that was preventing me from progressing. I wasn't, I just didn't solve the puzzle. And according to some forum posts that I read on the Steam page, it looks like I'm not alone in that regard. It seems like maybe there's some more sort of telegraphing of certain solutions could be useful in some cases. If I wasn't stuck on some of those puzzles, this game could have been even shorter. than the 5-hour run that I had. So I find it kind of difficult to really complain, at least in that regard. As an indie, this is not exactly a very difficult to run game for most computers. Older systems might have trouble applying the composite video filter, or CRT filter that this game calls it, which kind of just fries the edges of some of the crisp pixels otherwise. I could have enabled that for this. My 2070 had really no trouble at all keeping up with it. But some people who might have older systems, maybe if you're running integrated graphics on an older system, you might run into trouble there. But the game's overall specs are pretty low, wants 2 gigs of RAM. So that should give you some idea. Pixel art games are usually pretty easy to run. So performance-wise, it was really no problem. There were a few bugs, though, that I did run into throughout the course of my playthrough. Some of which I reported to Breadfrown, and they fixed them immediately. Others were kind of harder to really describe. There was one instance where I was running into a gate and got blown by the wind, and I got sucked into the gate, and then I had to wait for the wind to switch directions to blow me out of the gate, for instance. It was just one of these weird sort of edge cases that I ran into, but nothing that really broke the game, except for this other scenario where I was actually trying to run away from this phantom enemy that was attacking me. I couldn't figure out the solution to not being attacked by it. And as I switched rooms, I got hit by the enemy. And then when the next room loaded, I was like stuck somewhere in the floor. And then it just kind of devolved from there as I was switching menus and stuff. Yeah, there are definitely some hitches and bugs. It's an indie developed game, so kind of expect that. Save often, save when you can. I never lost a ton of progress though, so that was pretty good. Now, the combat of the game, I want to talk about it again for just a moment because there's 2 forms of combat, maybe even 3 if you think about it. So the main form of combat in the game is the action-adventure style, kind of Zelda style gameplay where you swing a sword or hit a spear or use fireballs and stuff like that, right? Jumping and running and stuff like that feels really nice. Now that is the main thing that you'll use for most of the game. But then in boss fights, you're presented with sort of this turn-based RPG aesthetic, very similar to maybe Mother 3 with some backgrounds that wave around a little bit. Feels very reminiscent of Mother, Earthbound, that sort of thing. As you choose your items from the attack menu, you can swing a sword or, just do a bit of basic damage. Or you can use magic, but for magic, you have to first charge your abilities. And this is where the third kind of combat system comes into play, which is this Game Boy style looking interface where it will show like a single screen for you to complete some sort of task that relates to either you defending from the boss attack or where you perform an action reminiscent of some of the dungeon that you just completed, some of the puzzles. If you can quickly complete the little puzzle that it presents to you within 20 seconds or so, and you acquire the little orb, you gain 1 AP. You get 3 AP, you can use a magic attack ability that then does a bunch of damage and is sometimes necessary to advance the story. It's a very satisfying little sampler pack of genres, and the tricky part with when you do a bunch of different styles of combat, and it's difficult to nail both, and no matter how good you do, one's going to feel better than the other. And in this case, I think that the action-adventure combat overall feels a little bit better, but the fact that it's reintegrated into the boss fights is really interesting and kind of helps offset that pitfall that you sometimes run into with these sampler pack style of gameplay. So it's just really very interesting. Unfortunately, it's also very short-lived. It was for me about a 5-hour experience, which is kind of like getting just one nacho, when you could eat a whole plate full. So that's kind of the only real sticking point for me, is that makes it difficult to recommend that like this game ends just when it's getting good. And it's better for a game to end on a high note than to overstay its welcome, right? But in this case, it just feels like it ends right as I was hitting mastery of the system. It felt like there's so much more to do. There's so many unexplained questions. There's so many more islands that I didn't get to land on and explore in that Mode 7 airship. You know, it just felt like there's some more things there to be explored, and some more upgrades that I unlocked by looking into like hidden corners, and it didn't feel like I was able to fully utilize those upgrades that I had acquired. And yeah, it's a good problem to have, to leave me feeling wanting more, right? But also it's a difficult value proposition for a lot of people, though, to say, here's $15 for a 5-hour experience. But if you think of it a little bit differently, it might be better. So first of all, $15 on Steam, or $12 if you get it soon, because it's going to be on sale at launch to help celebrate the release of the game. But also, this could fund further development, possibly expansions. I don't know what the developer has plans for at this point, but I hope that they do expand upon this, because I think what they have here are some really good bones and some really interesting concepts and exploration within the genres in such a way that I feel like is worth supporting and experiencing, you know, as an enthusiast of RPGs, turn-based combat, and seeing some microcosms of evolution within the genre feels really rewarding. So it's definitely got a lot of that novelty, and it's not gonna last as long as a Trails in the Sky title or something of that sort. It's still going to be worthwhile for the avant-garde experience. I would recommend this to a very specific kind of person who might find some of the things that I've talked about today interesting and might not balk at the, well, $12 cost of entry. So anyways, I hope that this helps answer your questions about Crystal Tale Dawn of Dusk. There it is. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.